Rabbi Weinberg's classic,
Thank you.
48 Ways to Wisdom. And last week was Batalmud. Batalmud was the first of the 48 ways. And Batalmud really kind of broke down to the basic premise that life is about knowing reality. Life is about understanding many, many different things about the world. And even the various things we do for a living, as an example, or that we do for fun, what we really get out of that in a much deeper way is we get out of it that we understand a piece of reality. When someone's a lawyer and knows how to adjudicate a certain case, yes, he gets money for it and he knows a particular piece of as understanding. But really, in reality, he knows something about truth. And life is about connecting to truth all throughout your life. It's a lifelong study. We said in the beginning of Bereshis that Adam knew. I don't know why I have such a feedback here. Adam knew. See if I can
Everyone needs to mute themselves. Everyone needs to mute themselves.
Just 1 second. Okay, everybody's muting. Okay, good. Okay, I muted everybody, but I think you can unmute yourself when you want if you want to ask a question. So we see in the beginning of the Chumash, of the Torah, that Adam knew Chava, he knew Eve, and obviously knowledge there is a euphemism for intimate connection, intimate physical relations. They had relations, right? So it's understood as knowledge. So knowledge really means connection. So when you know, you connect to the world. Ultimately, you're really connecting to God, who is behind everything. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. We always say that this world is like an interactive game of hide and go seek, and Hashem is it. He's hiding. We have to find him. And you find God through knowledge, through connection, through knowledge. So the second of the 48 ways is called Shmiyat HaOzen. Shmiyat HaOzen means the listening or the hearing of the ears. Listening with your ears. That's what Shmiyat HaOzen means. If you want to know, you want to study, you want to become successful, you have to listen. You have to be someone who listens. Now, what really separates us from the animals is this idea of das, this idea of understanding. And the way to understand is first to really hear. Now, when we say hear in the Torah, I guess the thing everybody thinks about is probably Shema. Shema is the most famous statement of hear. It's, hear, O Israel, Lord our God, the Lord is one. And when we say hear over there, we don't mean, we don't just mean listen. We actually mean hear. When you say to someone, you're not hearing me, you don't mean that you're not hearing the words they're not hearing the words you say. You mean they don't understand you. They don't get you. They don't understand the depth of what you're trying to communicate. So when we say hear, we really mean understand in a deep way. This is not about the surface. And I guess if you know anything about Judaism and about Jews, we're not superficial people. Not at all. The whole point of Judaism is to dig down below the surface. And the first level is hearing. So you really should have a question. Everybody should have a question over here when you heard the second way was the Shmiyat HaOzen, hearing of the ears. And the obvious question is, what else are you going to hear with if not your ears? Right? I mean, what are we talking about? You're not going to hear with your foot. You're not going to hear with anything but your ears. And it almost seems a little superfluous to say hearing with your ears. Now, I just wanted to give an analogy before I go into that. Something that happened to me and might have happened to some of you who have become more religious over time. To someone who's religious from birth, I don't know if they're going to appreciate this quite as much, but I learned Hebrew as a kid up until I went to bar mitzvah, and that was pretty much it. And then when I was in my late 20s, I got more interested in Judaism, and I started, learning Hebrew again. And my first interface with Hebrew really was the siddur, because you're starting to pray, and then the Chumash, but the siddur on a daily basis, I was trying to pray. And I noticed that when you pray, especially to someone who has a book in front of them, the tendency is not to say the words, but to think the words. You know what I'm saying? Like as soon as you open the book, when you look at the word, whatever the words are, you're supposed to pray them. You're supposed to say the words out loud, right? But the tendency is to see the word and to think in your head what it means. You go right to the brain. Now, why do I say this? For someone who was picking up Hebrew after a long stint of not doing it, the first time I would see the word, I'd probably get it wrong. Or there's a good chance that every 10th word, I might not get the vowel right? And you wonder, when you work with Bali Tshuva, you wonder why they keep making the same mistakes all the time when they're reading. And I noticed that when I was reading, even when my lips were moving, I wasn't really saying the words. I was thinking the words. It was in my brain somewhere. It bypassed, so to speak, my mouth and went right to my brain. I don't know if this resonates with any of you, but I often notice, I see people on my Shabbos table benching, and I look at them, and often they're not even moving their lips. And I realize they're not, they think they're reading, but they're not. They're just seeing it in their brain. I mean, they think they're saying it. They're really reading it. They're seeing it and they're reading it in their brain. So there's a similar thing goes on with hearing. A very similar thing goes on with hearing. And that is that when someone's talking to us, someone's telling us information, giving us information, often we go right to interpretation. We don't really listen. We're not really listening with our ears. We let it go right to our preconceived notions about what this person's saying. It's almost like as soon as we hear one aspect of a word, you're being disrespectful, boom, it just sets off an interpretation in my mind, which has nothing necessarily to do with what I'm actually hearing. So I think the depth of the idea of Shmiat HaOzen, why it says listen with the ears, hear with the ears, is it's saying, you know what? The first step in understanding is first listening. Listening. Get the information as if you were a tape recorder, as if you were a lawyer taking a deposition on a case, right? You wouldn't go right to interpretation. You first have to get the facts. Now, this alone is a very dramatic point that probably would change the way we understand things, how we learn. I imagine that many of us are really stopped from learning because we don't really listen. In other words, we're really not taking information in that has any ability to challenge our preconceived notions. And that's dangerous because it's very hard to grow when you don't challenge your pre-existing notions. So it's very important. So the first idea here, which I think is crucial, is simple listening, which actually is not so simple after all. And to do that, you have to be silent. Now, it's not, interestingly enough, it's not just silent in don't interrupt the other person. It's be silent in your mind. To listen, you need to be silent in your mind. You have to turn off what you're thinking, what you're feeling. Now, a very good barometer of whether you're listening or not, there are a few barometers, but one is if you're starting to feel anything emotional about what the person's saying, it's a tip-off to the fact you went into interpretation mode. You're not really listening to what they're saying in a dispassionate way. If you're thinking about what you're going to say next, obviously also you're not listening. So it's very interesting. Rabbi Weinberg pointed this out. I never realized this before. Did you know that the word listen and the word silent has the exact same letters in it? Isn't that fascinating? To listen, you really have to be silent. That's a number 2, very, very important point. Silent in your head is more important probably than being silent in your mouth. Okay, now this I think in and of itself would probably change our discourse with people, our ability to take information and challenge our assumptions. But let's take it a step further. Rabbi Weinberg, in Judaism particularly, was crazy about definitions, very important definitions. And he would have a very amusing way of relating this. And someone would come to him, he met many students, many travelers, many older people in his office in Jerusalem when he was alive. And some people would love Israel, but there'd be occasionally younger people who were a little bit bothered. They thought Israel and Jerusalem would be somehow different than it was. And the rabbi would say, have you noticed that this land is holy? That's a holy land. And they would say, Rabbi, I've traveled the north to the south, to the east, to the west. I've even been at the holy wall, the western wall. I don't feel holiness at all in this place. The rabbi would look at him and say, you don't feel holiness in the holy land? He would say, tell me, when you were up north, did you ever see a bafuf stick? The guy would be, what, a bafuf stick? He says, yeah, did you ever see a bafuf stick? And he said, what's a bafuf stick? No, don't tell. No, just tell me, have you ever seen a bafuf stick? So he said, how can I tell you if I've seen a bafuf stick when I don't even know what a bafuf stick is? The rabbi would always say, well, how can you then say you've never felt holiness here when you might not know what holiness really is? You gotta have a definition. You know, a guy would come to him and say, Rabbi, I don't need religion. I am a good person. You've heard that one before? I don't need religion. I am a good person. So Rabbi Weinberg would ask them, well, let me ask you a question. How do you define a good person? It's a very interesting question, because even if you ask that question to Americans, most Americans would say a good person is one that doesn't hurt anybody else. You know, don't do unto others as you wouldn't want them to do unto you. But by the way, that's a Christian golden rule, which is from our statement, which is v'ahavta l'recha kamocha. V'ahavta l'recha kamocha doesn't just say love your neighbor like yourself. It doesn't just say don't do harmful things to people. Of course, don't do harmful things to people. You got to love people. You got to do positive things to people. The Jewish definition of good is not just not hurting people. That's an awfully low bar, right? So you have to know that you might be a horrible person if all you do is not hurt people, but all you do is for yourself. You can be a very, very horrible person according to Judaism. So you have to know, what does it mean to be good? And by the way, he would even point out, if you go to an evil person, you go ask Hitler in Mach Shemo, was he good? What do you think he's going to tell you? He's going to say, of course I was good. I'm trying to save humanities from the degradation that the Jews have brought of conscience and morality to the world. I'm trying to save the world from those Jewish people. Of course I'm good. So you have to try to understand what's good. What does it really mean? You have to have an objective definition, or anybody could say anything and then rationalize that he fits whatever it is, because we're used the terms in a tremendously, tremendously vague way. And once, Rabbi Weinberg would say, you have to know there's a God, right? There's a commandment, the first commandment in the Torah, know there's a God. So he would say you have to break it down. General and the details. What does it mean to know? What does it mean to know? Now, most of us would look at that statement, take it as self-evident, and move on. But we would miss nuance. So he would say that, there's a thing called knowledge, there's a thing called belief, there's a thing called faith, and then there's something called social conditioning. And he would say, what's the difference between knowledge, belief, faith, and social conditioning? And ultimately, the definitions changed based on the amount of evidence you had for your position. Knowledge was, he would say, 5-finger clarity. You know something like you know you have 5 fingers, or your mother's your mother. So knowledge is a category based on significant amount of evidence. Not fuzzy. Whereas what's belief? Belief is evidence to support the conclusion, but it's not to give you the perception that it's 5-finger clarity, right? You have evidence. It's more like when you go to a doctor over many, many years and he prescribes medication for you. You believe he's going to act with you now as he's done for the last 10 years. You don't know. Do you have 5-finger clarity? He gave you the right prescription. You have belief and trust, I guess you would say, that he did. What about faith as a definition? Faith, he would say, is you desire for something to be true, but you have little or no evidence. Little or no evidence. Isn't that fascinating? When you start thinking about these things, thinking through these things, you get real clarity as to what you're talking about, what you're trying to come up with. And he would say something interesting, social conditioning. Social conditioning is that I'm trying to acculturate, I'm trying to condition someone to do good things. You know, we tell our kids, we want them to believe in freedom and equal rights for people, and we socially condition it to them. We don't necessarily give them the evidence. We try to inculcate them with these ideas because we know they're good. Now, one man's social conditioning could be another man's brainwashing, which is a very interesting thing. What's the difference between me socially conditioning my children to believe in God versus the communists in the old days brainwashing them into belief about communism? So you got to check out your assumptions. But it's fascinating to start defining your terms. It really, really is fascinating when you start doing this. Rabbi Weimer, just to bring you through one of these ideas, and I think it's very interesting. When I was doing this myself, just in preparation, it's hard, but it actually is a lot of fun. It actually is very interesting. So he would say, what about free will? We use that word a lot. It's the basis, one of the fulcrums of Judaism is that people have free will. And he would say, well, what does free will mean? We toss it around, but what does it really mean? So he'd say it's freedom to choose between what and what. What are we choosing? So he said, what about, am I choosing whether I could jump to the moon or not? Interesting point, right? He says, obviously not. You can't jump to the moon. So that can't be what free will means. Well, how about, can I choose to see or not to see? Not really. You have sight. You're not really capable of seeing or not seeing. You have sight. So what does it mean? How about choosing between eating vanilla and chocolate ice cream? Now, I wish I could have you participate over here because I'd like to get your interaction on this. It'd be a lot more fun. Maybe you can unmute yourselves. It might actually be a little more fun here to do that. Let me unmute you and see what happens. So he would say, what about the choice between chocolate and vanilla ice cream? Is that free will?
Yes.
What do you think?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's a choice for sure, but is it a free will choice?
Well, the flavor difference?
Yeah, chocolate, vanilla. Yeah.
No.
Or you could say, I don't want.
Huh?
You could say, I don't want any ice cream.
He always does that.
You sound like my wife.
Yes, he always does that.
Like it's a free
what? I didn't hear.
It's free choice to pick a flavor.
Let me ask you a question.
It's
When an animal, you put a vanilla ice cream on the floor, right, in a bowl, and you put tuna fish on the bowl. Where does the cat? The cat's there. Where does the cat go?
Right to the food.
Fish.
Goes right to the tuna fish. You think the cat has free will between choosing the tuna fish and choosing the vanilla ice cream?
Instinct.
It's instinct.
Yeah, it's a preference, right? It's a pre-programmed preference, right? So let me ask you something. When you go for vanilla ice cream versus the chocolate ice cream, how much less of an instinct is that?
That's a preference.
It's a preference. Is there anything on the? Well, let me ask you a question. I love vanilla ice cream. Chocolate ice cream is not for me. Is there any struggle within me? Any question about what I'm going to choose?
No.
No, right?
No, the struggle is whether you should have it if it's.
No, that's a different question, Michelle. That's what I was trying to say before. That's my wife's question. Honey, do you really need the ice cream? That's a different question. It's a great question, but it's a different question. When you're in the category of wanting ice cream, the choice between the two, you would probably admit to me, I know it's some type of a choice, but it's not that significant of a choice, right? I guess you probably can even agree with me, at least on that, right? It's not that significant of a choice. What about like this? What about this choice? You're a prisoner. Someone's a prisoner in a jail, and I give them a choice of eating their dinner, standing up or sitting down. Is that a free will choice?
No.
I think it is. It's probably more comfortable to sit. If you said you can only eat your food standing.
No, I didn't say that. I give you a choice. You can eat the food standing, eat the food sitting. So what? Yeah, okay. Again, it's a choice, but what's lacking in that? What would be bothering you about that as well? Similar to the last point.
What's the difference if he's sitting?
What'd you say? What's the
difference?
What's the difference? Very good.
All he wants is to eat.
Excellent. What's the difference? It doesn't seem meaningful in any way, right? So I'm digging down a little now here. So maybe free will is not just preference, not just instinct, not even a non-meaningful choice. Maybe free will, what we're talking about when we really mean free will, is meaningful choice.
So I got something for you. How about if the sergeant said to the jail person, I will give you your food every day, only if you say a prayer on it. If you don't say it, you can't eat the food.
I didn't hear you.
So what happens if the guard says to the prisoner, I will feed you every day your dinner, but you can only have your dinner if you say a prayer on it. If you say no prayer,
well, see, so now you're changing the equation, and you're saying is the choice to give into this jailer who's maybe it's a evil or immoral request versus not. That's free will. That's a meaningful. That could have jumped the scenario into something meaningful. That's my point. Now let me ask you another question. So if we're all then we agree that free will really has more to do with a meaningful choice than a non-meaningful choice. Let me ask you another question. Where does meaning come from? What is meaning a derivative of?
Hashem.
Yeah, you're going to the top, but we're not quite there yet. I don't think, because really, it's a good question, but meaning.
There's some woman on this thing like you that needs
something meaningful means that it has it somehow buys into a purpose, a larger purpose, right? In other words, if there's no purpose, I let you go play on a tennis court, basically, right? And I don't give you any. I just say go play. So whether you take the tennis racket and use it as a snowshoe, whether you take it and you use it as a sword fighting with the guy you're playing with, or whether you play it the way it was intended to play, I can't say one of your expressions was any more meaningful than any other expression because I didn't give you the purpose of the game. I didn't tell you what the purpose of this experiment was. Purpose leads to whether something is meaningful or not. If there's no purpose, if there's no truth, if there's no reason for this world as an example, then can anything really be meaningful or not meaningful in an objective sense? I don't think so. Right? You have to have purpose. Now, once you have purpose, once I know, okay, the purpose of life is to, whatever you want to say, is to give to other people. So then you can then say, right, doing the right thing is to give, right? And doing the wrong thing is to withhold, because you have a mission statement, so to speak, for purpose. So when you say we have free will to do something meaningful, like Michelle, you said to do something, to give into immorality, that immoral command the guard gave you, or your moral right to decline, that fight, that's right and wrong. So right and wrong derives from purpose. So now we're digging down. We're saying free will choice is really about meaningful. It's really about right and wrong.
Takes a lot of.
Let me ask you another question. What really is right and wrong? Right and wrong is just a subset, really, to get you to the higher level. The higher level is when you do something right. What, in the end of the day, what does that do for you when you do something right?
It connects our soul more frequently to, instead of going about our day with physical mindset, there's some spiritual mindset that's sprinkled in.
Well, I would say it connects you to truth.
The higher source.
It connects you to God. Now, your soul is just a connection to God, right? So when you do something right, you're connecting to God, who's the source of all life. So when you do something right, you're living. When God forbid someone does something wrong, so to speak, what are they doing? They're a little bit dying, meaning the soul is not connected. Like you said before, your soul is not actualized. Your soul is not connected to the source of the meaning and the purpose. Because meaning and purpose have no independent existence outside of our creator, right? If there's no objective designer of purpose, there's no purpose. So really, you could say free will is a struggle between life and death. Now, would you know that's how the Torah describes it, interestingly enough? The Torah describes free will as a choice, b'charta b'chayim, to live or to die. Those of you who have learned with us before probably have known this, and Rabbi Weinberg's understood it in a very practical way. We just went all the way up to the highest philosophy. Free will is between life and death. And now we're going to bring it down practicality. So you know what the definition of free will he gave us? You probably all know this already because you're all people I recognize. Free will is the choice between doing what you want to do and doing what you feel like doing. Free will is the choice between doing what you want to do versus doing what you feel like doing. Rabbi Weinberg would say, what you want to do is connected to your soul and is connected to life. What you feel like doing is connected to the temporary pleasure at hand at the very moment that your body's pulling you towards, the comfort that you can get in the moment, and that's death. He would say if you do what your soul wants more than your body wants, you'll live, or the reverse. So in other words, he would really say that, if someone insulted somebody else, right? God forbid, right? Someone insults somebody. So now he has a free will choice. Am I going to apologize or am I not going to apologize? Now, why should he apologize? It's the right thing to do. Right? It's the right thing to do. He hurt somebody. He has to acknowledge it, regret it. He has to absolve. He has to come clean and right the wrong, right? So the right thing to do is to apologize. So why doesn't a person want to apologize?
Uncomfortable. So
He's
admitting
uncomfortable.
you're wrong.
He might be embarrassed. It might lower his self-esteem too much. Whatever it is, he has a fight, or else we'd always apologize, right? So obviously, on one hand, you know the right thing to do is apologize. On the other hand, it's painful to do so. So Rabbi Weinberg would say something just so brilliant based on this definition of free will. And listen to this. This could change your life in and of itself. He would say, no one is choosing to do evil in this world. Doesn't exist. Unless you're a psychopath. But 99.9% of the people are trying to do good, and they will choose good. You know what gets in their way? They don't want to take the pain of doing good, so they'll often rationalize and do not good. He said, evil is not a choice to do evil directly. It typically starts with a choice of not taking the pain to be good. Because free will always typically takes overcoming a temptation to do something wrong. It's a fascinating understanding, but realize this comes right out of a definition of free will. Now, I hope you enjoyed that progression of defining free will, but it's hard. It isn't easy, but if you stick to it, if you try to define your terms, then we're really able to understand and have a dialogue with other people that thinks things differently than we do. So the first thing is you got to listen. The second idea, I think, is you have to know what your biases are, and you have to know what your preconceived notions are that are going to get in the way of listening. They're going to block you from really hearing. One very good thing is, besides being silent, is when someone's telling you things that you don't agree with, repeat back what they say. Do you mean to say this? Get it clear. Also it tries to get it out of the level of personal. It gets it much more dispassionate. Repeat what they say, have them repeat what you say. Then you should try to get to the point of, okay, let's define our terms here. Let's define our terms, because that's the only thing you really can do to move forward. And the rabbi would say, he used to have this game called the I, you, he game, which helped define terms. And I'm going to describe it to you. But it's fascinating. It actually happened last night. I have two sons that just came back from yeshiva last night. And someone gave them a ride from the graduation. And they came home. We said, we're buying a new car, buying a used car. So we were talking about cars. And they said, boy, this guy's car was really nice. We had this Honda Pilot, and it really hugs the road. And he said, we almost did get killed once because he took a turn, up in the country at about 60 miles an hour, careening on two wheels. We almost got killed once, but other than that, it was a great ride home. So the IUE game's like this. Guy goes around that curve at 50 miles an hour, and there's three people. There's the person that's upset in the car. There's the person he's talking to who did the action, and there's another guy outside. I, you, he. I is the person that says what he's going to say. You is the person he's talking to. He is someone that is not in the room with the two of them. So here we go. The driver of that car, once you say to him, how could you do that? You almost killed us. He says, I'm brave and I'm a thrill seeker. I'm just living on the edge here. So you say to him, I think that was foolhardy. I think that was a little bit foolish that you took this curve at 60 miles an hour. Now, my sons would never say that, but I might. And if my sons described this scene to his parents, you know what the parents are going to call the kid who did it? He's a reckless idiot. So somebody says he's brave. Second person, when they're with him, says you're foolhardy. Third says you're a reckless idiot. The Rabbi Weinberg would say, let's define our terms. What's a brave person? So he said a brave person is someone who takes a necessary risk for a worthwhile outcome, right? A fireman goes into a burning building. It's a necessary risk, but it's a risk. He might die, he might get hurt for a worthwhile outcome. Every one of the firemen's brave. What's a foolhardy action? Someone who takes an unnecessary risk for a worthwhile cause. What if the fire truck has a cherry picker and they could get the guy out the window versus you running into the building? So you took an unnecessary risk going into a burning building when there was another way to save the person. That'd be called foolhardy. What's a reckless idiot?
Someone who
unnecessary risk for an unnecessary purpose. So when you will agree on those terms, right? You'll agree on those three terms. So the category of the guy, the kid, going 60 miles an hour around a curve in the country, what will we call that? Probably call it a reckless idiot. But it's interesting. Once you define your terms and you agree beforehand on the definition, then even people that have different perspectives probably could come to a common conclusion. Isn't that fascinating? If you have an argument with somebody and you're a reckless idiot, no, I'm a brave person. No, you're foolhardy. If you don't define your terms, there's no outcome. I'm even thinking today, like everything now is about police brutality, right? So wouldn't it be an amazing thing for everybody if they would actually define brutality? You can even define police. What's a policeman? Who is he? What are his responsibilities? What are his the things at his disposal to adjudicate what his job is? And what's brutality? I bet if we had common definitions for these types of things, we'd be able to actually come to understanding that we don't have now. So the beautiful thing that Rabbi Weinberg was saying is, you got to listen. You got to take it in. You got to try to be a lacking personal charge. That's another problem we have all today. No one really is listening to anybody. Nobody. It's all at the level of emotion. It's all at the level of personal opinion and personal outrage. And you can't ever get to any type of dialogue. So it's so important to try to get that bias out of the way. And I tell you, one of the greatest Jewish sages, the two sages that argued all the time, we can really learn this from. You know, Hillel and Shammai, who are on the Talmud, they're arguing constantly. We know from the Talmud as well that they went out of their way to make shidduchim, to make marriage connections between their two families. They didn't want anyone to think, God forbid, that they had anything personal between them which motivated their arguments throughout the Talmud. Meaning, if they're on the same page that we really want the best, we really want the good, the common good of everyone, more objective and more for the common good, that's the best way we're going to be able to have our ears get open to really hear things. We have to really be after the common good. And I think just to end, the last point is that, Talmud is all about, and Jewish learning is all about, I forget, it's a Greek phrase. I forget what the phrase is, but it's thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. What's it called? It's that triangle, but it's called something, the something method. I forget what it's called. But that's how you learn. You have to have a thesis. You have to have an antithesis. And antithesis means it's opposite my thesis. I don't move to a higher conclusion. I don't move to a higher ground unless I have opposition. We tend to forget that. If there's no opposition to a position you hold in anything in life, there's stasis. There's no growth. That's what Pesach's all about. Pesach's really, the underpinning is that unless I have a question, which means I'm lacking something, I will never be able to then fulfill it to move to the next level. And usually the way it is encountering other opinions. Thesis, antithesis, synthesis. And synthesis really means really digging down to a deeper level. And that's what Judaism is. And Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad means here there's a oneness, there's a one idea that's going to help unify your two positions. If you listen to each other, get your personal biases out of the way, and try to really come to common definitions. Rabbi Weinberg would say that men of goodwill, reasoning together, will always come to a common conclusion. You hear that? He would maintain this is the truth. Men reasoning together, men and women reasoning together in good faith will always come to a common conclusion. It's fascinating because what he's basically saying is if you're not reasoning, if you're not of goodwill, you won't come to a common conclusion. You don't respect each other. You don't have those preconditions. You'll never come to a common conclusion. So anyway, to me, this is a very beautiful way Shmiyat HaOzen, very instructive, and it'll really change how we take information. It'll change our relationships as well. I didn't really say that, but imagine, I have to be a very feisty person in terms of arguments. I have to be very feisty, very debate-oriented, and I would do better to take this advice to heart a little bit. Sit back, listen, not get to the second level so quickly, particularly in the times we live in. Okay, anybody have any questions or thoughts you want to add?
Rabbi, that was amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
A lot to it.
It was worth.
There really is a lot to it. The proof of the pudding is a lot of these 40 ways is, can we put into practice? Can we try to, in the 2 weeks that we're not on today, I do this every 2 weeks, like try to put it into practice in the next 2 weeks. Rabbi Weinberg, he actually had, I don't know if I wrote it down, but he said, tolerance is an example. Word like tolerance, bigotry, racism. Try to define those terms for yourself. What does it mean to you? You might have to actually look at a dictionary also. Dictionaries are pretty good to help us a little bit. But as you define, you really dig down and you get a tremendous clarity on, what concepts are. And you can make some progress.
Thank you so much.
Okay, everybody. Have a wonderful day.
Rabbi, I sent you a little something if you saw it.
Oh, you sent me something?
Yeah, just read it and see if that was what you were thinking.
How'd you send it?
Through the chat on Zoom.
On Zoom.
It's
dialect. Yeah, Hegelian dialectic.
Yeah, that's.
I think it might actually even precede Hegel. I think it's Greek. I think it goes back to the Greeks.
The Socratic.
Maybe you got it off of that. But thesis, antithesis, synthesis.
The Socratic Method.
That's it. Socratic Method. That's what I was thinking. Look up the Socratic Method, Michelle, and see if that is thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, no, it's the Hegelian dialect. That's what that is. According to Google, I don't know.
According to Google, the thesis, synthesis, and antithesis is Hegelian dialectic.
Yeah.
What's a Socratic method?
Well, you know that.
Well,
that's
the Socratic. Yeah, well,
college and law school.
What does that say?
Yeah, Socratic Method. Socratic Method is questioning each.
So they're just questioning assumptions and everything else.
Yeah.
I didn't
Very
look up.
Okay.
Yeah,
Next time I'll try to remember the Hegelian dialectic.
Yeah, I know. I don't know.
It actually sounds quite.
I presume you took a philosophy course or two in your day.
Very good.
Did you take philosophy at Dartmouth?
I did, yeah. Different kinds of philosophy. I did. I took philosophy. I took religion. I took humanity type stuff. Greek tragedy, a lot of Greek literature and tragedies and comedies and all that stuff. All those things. But anyway, good to talk to you guys. How's everything going?
Yeah, everything's going well.
Yeah, Rabbi.